Hello and welcome to Stories That Shape Us. My name is Joanna Daniel. Thank you for joining me in this series. I'm so enjoying doing this one on how to heal from spiritual trauma and hold on to your faith. And although I can't consider myself somebody who've experienced spiritual trauma, I've experienced enough toxic people within my faith to know and understand a little bit about what it what it's like and listen to enough people healing to know how damaging and how harmful it is. And and because I know God and know God's heart, I know that it's not reflective of the things I hear and the things that people experience. And so really passionate about helping people to understand what it is. So most of this series really is just explaining what it is and just encouraging you to find safe spaces. In 2020, I wrote a small ebook that I have not published called Living on the Edge because I got to the place where I didn't think I could go on. And I haven't shared this with many people because I didn't question my faith. It wasn't my faith that was in question. That was solid. It was because I'm never going anywhere. So that was not in question. But the challenge I had was and I suppose the pandemic gave us a lot of time and space to reflect, to think, to make decisions and to really connect with what we want and what was available and what was okay and what wasn't okay. And there was a lot of things that wasn't okay. So I wrote Living on the Edge because it was kind of like a process of fasting that I was going through and praying, not to make what I have okay, but to accept that it wasn't and it was no longer enough for me. As God would have it, things changed and gave me time to go through that process to make some adjustment. And yeah, it doesn't look the same anymore. That's all I'll say about that. So today I want to talk about the church that manages this closure of abuse poorly and how this impact on your spiritual life when they manage disclosures of abuse poorly, whatever kind of abuse. Whether so, let's talk about sexual abuse first. The church that manages the exposure disclosures rather of sexual abuse in a poor way. And the first thing I'll say is that the pastor, the elders cannot do the investigation. Every church that you're in, whether it's a church or community fellowship, whatever, should have a safeguarding plan. They should have a child protection lead who will take the story and write it down and call the police or take it to social services or somebody who is able to who is trained, who understand and is not, because sometimes disclosures of abuse are handled in a way to protect the church. The church is not the church is not in question. The church is not at stake. The reputation of the church is not in jeopardy. An individual harm another individual, and that's the issue. But oftentimes it's seen as the church is going to become persecuted or whatever. And so the church is looked after and the victim is left vulnerable, especially in the case of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, allegations of abuse. When you make decisions to protect the church, therefore you protect the perpetrator, therefore the victim is left vulnerable and exposed, and other people are at risk when that is done. And so you might have experienced situations where allegations are made and the church go into full protection mode, closing in around the abuser and leaving the victim and their family vulnerable. The victim and the family is vulnerable. The people connected to the victim is vulnerable. And so sometimes people don't disclose because they just don't want to go through that. They don't want to go through a place and a space where they are victimized. Now, a church that is healthy with healthy, strong leadership who understands will listen to those abused and will immediately put measures in place to protect. They'll protect the vulnerable. They'll protect the person who makes the allegation. Protection will be made, and appropriate people will do investigations. People that are appropriate will do the investigations. So it's really important that we see how that works, and not the church board. The church board can't do the investigation when an allegation of sexual abuse is made, because the church board don't have the skills to do it. On the church board might be people from different professions, but they can't do it, especially if the allegation is made against a leader. You are not in a position to do it because you are their friend, and therefore you can't remain neutral. And even though you feel you might be, what would best serve the cause is that you step aside and let somebody else do it. Even if even if you believe the victim, step aside, let somebody else lead the investigation. And so if you make an allegation and you're gaslighted into silence, you're manipulated into silence, you are intimidated, and you are discouraged from pursuing any kind of legal claim or just anything else like that, then that's not a safe space. That's not a safe place. Okay. Leaders who are dismissive of your story so that they can protect the people, sometimes with their friends. When they minimize the story, that's not such a big deal. Like what that's they're leaders. They are men of God. They are people of God. They're your leaders. You should respect those who are set above you. And this is your cross. This is your trial. And they're making it something, your abuse as something that is a spiritual crucible that God has given you. God did not give you that. Somebody abused you. God did not give you a cross to carry. This is not yours. It's not yours. It's not your shame. It's not a cross. It's not something that you need to grapple with spiritually to find a spiritual understanding. And leader harmed you. They harm your child. They harm your friend. That's the bottom line. There's no spiritual spin to put on it. Regardless of how they'd like to spin it, no spiritual spin can be put on it. A leader harmed you. Short of the story. Okay. Now let's talk about allegations of domestic abuse. This is often sometimes dealt with in the same way. And sometimes there are churches, and I saw somebody post this recently, that there are churches that prefer marriages to people. They prefer marriages. So they will defend marriages so much that they will leave people in abuse to protect marriage. Now, we are not the guardian of marriages. God is, right? And when somebody discloses domestic abuse, the victim again is isolated and left on their own. Sometimes women are told that this is again your cross, that just pray more, fast and pray, be different, be better, be a better woman, be a better Christian woman, be a better wife, cook more, dress up, fix yourself. Don't be tired when your husband comes home. Be available, be whatever to make him change. And you can't be anything that will make an abuser change. So once again, we know that that's not a safe place. And again, church, what leaders might want to do is to get you two together to talk. Never have a meeting with the perpetrator. And I know initially when you're trying to sort it out and you try to work through the marriage, this might seem like a good idea to you. But if they want to do any counsel, let them counsel the perpetrator and you go get counsel somewhere else. If you're a leader and listening to this, don't try to get the two people together to fix it. You cannot fix it. You cannot fix it. On this channel, there are lots of videos. I did a whole series 2 weeks ago. Last week, actually, I finished a series last week around domestic abuse. There's lots of information that you can listen and you can make decisions about what is abuse, what's a difficult marriage versus what's an abusive marriage. I did 2 videos on that. It will give you an idea when somebody discloses that, okay, this is an abusive marriage. And therefore, you, sir, cannot have a meeting with the two of them to try and fix it. You cannot fix it. You might be well intentioned and you might feel like they both respect me if I go in and talk to them, but you need to talk to your brother and go get him some help. Okay. So that you might, when you're in these situations and you're disclosing abuse, whether it's sexual abuse or domestic abuse, and I have to add this because sometimes children will disclose physical abuse. And again, children might be gaslighted again and manipulated to go home, be better children. Children must obey their parents. And we send children home into homes where they're abused and they're harmed, and the parents are not even spoken to. They're not held to account. And so as people who are Christians, we really need to do better in managing abuse. So if you're from a church where you disclose and you were shamed and you were gaslighted, people intimidate you with scriptures and you are crushed because you expected to be loved and to be listened to and to be valid and to be validated and to be believed, and none of those things happen. It might be crushing for you to know that the place where you have loved and have given so much of yourself felt like they turned back on you. Often it's not everybody there, but the ones who do it are so strong, they're at the forefront, and so they'll block everybody else. And sometimes there are people in the congregation who want to come forward, but they're intimidated to do it. So you might be hurt and angry that everybody does this, but everybody, it's unlikely that everybody would. And I don't want to tell you how to feel or even join the line of people gaslighting you, because if your experience is your experience, you might know that the church came at you. Your experience is valid, but there are places where people will believe you and listen to you. If you're sifting through what you experience versus who God is, and sometimes there's confusion and you can't work out what is what, give yourself some time. Take some time out, spend some time in the quiet where you can stop, you can pause, and you can hear the voice of God. I know that He doesn't want you to live in an abusive home. I know that He doesn't want you to, it wasn't your fault with the sexual abuse and the molestation. It wasn't. You didn't do anything wrong. I know that it's wrong that leadership didn't listen to you and they came at you and they protected the abuser and left you on your own. That is not reflective of the heart of Christ. And the perpetrator is probably still serving and given positions in church and leadership, and all kinds of things is happening. And here you are struggling with PTSD and depression, and you are having really horrific post-trauma memories, and they're being elevated. That's hard and that's wrong. And your pain is valid. I know that it can heal. All the layers can heal. The abuse itself, the spiritual trauma, the abandonment, all of it can heal. But one thing I know for sure is that God didn't abandon you, that He didn't join the ranks of the opposition, that He's with you, that He didn't join them and intimidate you, and that He didn't close in and lock you out. He didn't do that. They did it and pretend to do it in His name, but they weren't acting on His behalf. Take some time out. And again, when you feel ready, find a space and places and a community, because our pain happens in relationship. We need a relationship to heal. The relationship might look different. It might be in a group for sexual trauma. It might be in a group for women who are healing from domestic abuse. It might be in a retreat for total strangers, but you'll find groups and safe spaces to heal so that you can learn again, once again, how to hear Him. Because your pain at the moment is compounded. It's the abuse and it's the spiritual piece. It's losing your church. It's losing your community. It's losing perhaps a ministry that you were serving and that you loved. It's the betrayal. It's the shock of the people that turned against you. It's all of those things and maybe more. Your pain is valid. God hears it. He understands it, and He wants to love you through it. Find safe spaces where you can do all of that work in, so that you can hold on to your faith and don't let them take something away from you that you value so deeply. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join me on the next story.